When the Sahaba reached around, we don't know the exact number, but roughly a ballpark figure, around 20 or 30 of the Sahaba were present, the Prophet ﷺ realized that he needed a place to congregate. Because they couldn't do so in Mecca, in the Kaaba, because it was too public. A lot of Muslims were secret Muslims. They hadn't informed their relatives and friends of their Islam, especially some of the slaves who had converted. They hadn't told their masters. So they needed a place that they could congregate. There was no mosque that they could pray in other than the Kaaba. The first mosque that was ever built in Islam was the Masjid al-Quba. Masjid Quba was the first masjid ever built in Islam. There was no masjid before Masjid Quba. A physical masjid, and that's why Allah calls it أَوَّلُ بَيْتٍ أُسِّسَ عَلَى taqwa. Right? Allah calls it in the Quran, the first house of worship built upon taqwa, meaning in Islam. So there was no masjid in Mecca. The Kaaba at this time is a holy land, but there's idols around it. There's no sanctuary. So the Prophet ﷺ decided to choose the house of, as you all know, Al-Arqam ibn Abil Arqam. And his name is probably Al-Asad ibn Abdul Uzza. Al-Arqam ibn Abil Arqam is his title, his common name. Al-Arqam ibn Abil Arqam. And so Dar Al-Arqam became the place where the Sahaba would meet. When did this happen? We don't have any year, but probably around, we would estimate around the middle of the third or the beginning of the fourth year. In other words, as soon as the da'wah went public, within a few months after that. Remember, the da'wah went public after 3 years, right? After 3 years, the da'wah went public. Before 3 years, there is no public da'wah, so we don't have people converting that much. After 3 years, when the da'wah becomes public, all of this persecution begins. The Prophet ﷺ needs a place, so he chooses the house of Al-Arqam. Now, question, why the house of Al-Arqam? What is the wisdom behind choosing the house of Al-Arqam? The books of Seerah do not mention this, so we need to study who is this person, Al-Arqam, where his house was, and then we try to derive some benefit. Al-Arqam, point number 1, he was from the noblemen of the Quraysh, but he was not from the tribe of Banu Hashim. He was from the tribe of Banu Makhzum. Who can tell me who is the most famous person from Banu Makhzum? Abu Jahl is from Banu Makhzum. So, by choosing somebody from the Banu Makhzum, automatically, nobody is going to suspect that a Makhzumi is going to help a Hashimi. Because there's huge rivalry between them. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ is choosing somebody from a tribe that is a rival tribe. Now Islam is more important to Muslims than Makhzum and Hashim, right? But the Jahili Arabs cannot look beyond their tribalism, their Jahiliyyah. So the Prophet ﷺ, number 1, he chooses somebody from the Makhzum. So it's not going to be suspicious. Number 2, Al-Arqam was of the first people to accept Islam. They say he was of the first 10. So clearly then he could be completely trusted. Because this is a secret place in Mecca. Nobody's supposed to know about it. So you need somebody that you can trust your life with. And so he chooses somebody who is of the earliest converts and they know him inside out. So he's of the first 10 converts to Islam. Number 3, according to one report, Al-Arqam had inherited this property from his father. He was a young man, probably in his late teens, maybe even 18, 19 years old. And so once again, this is added to the disguise that you wouldn't expect an 18-year-old kid to be such a brave. Of course, 18-year-old for them was a young man. For us, they're considered kids still, but for that age, he was a young man. Nobody would think that an 18-year-old would risk everything to help the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Point number 4. According to another report, Al-Arqam had not announced his Islam. He had kept it secret. And so yet another added, if you like, cover of secrecy, that nobody would know that Al-Arqam would be helping because they don't expect him to be a Muslim. Point number 5, the house of Al-Arqam was located behind the mountain of Safa. Now, the mountain of Safa, you all know where it is. Is that in the center of Mecca or is it outside of Mecca? The center of Mecca. So, why would you want a secret meeting place in downtown? One would imagine you would want a secret meeting place on the outskirts where nobody would see you. right? Why would you want a secret meeting place smack dab in the middle of downtown Mecca, which is behind Mount Safa? Who can figure this one out?
That was the least suspected place, right? I don't know.
True, but there's another point. Close by to what? The Kaaba. So how will that help them?
Abu Jahl's home was close. I think it was behind where the mention.
It's easier to maintain secrecy because they all live nearby.
Okay, but there's still a much more. That's true, but there's still a much more clearer point.
They can monitor maybe the.
They can monitor the Quraysh. You're not going to be able to eavesdrop from inside the house, but maybe a point. Imagine if 40 people are walking towards a small house outside of Mecca. Traffic. Everybody has to go to downtown. Every day. Mecca, everybody has to go there. Every day. That's what you do in the afternoon. When all of the chores are done, you go and you sit in the nadi or around the Kaaba. That's what you do for socialization. So getting to that area, walking to and fro, is the most natural thing in the world. And so, as Dr. Saab said, is basically right under their noses. That they're walking to a house that is smack in the middle of downtown because it's a stone's throw away from the Kaaba. You literally are attached to basically the area of the Haram, right? And so, right before they get the Haram, they go into an alley and there's the house right there. And so when they walk out, it's as if people are going to think they're coming from the Haram. Or they're walking to the Haram. So it's a location or an area that it would be very easy to explain why you're going in that direction and coming back from that direction. And why there's so many people coming and going basically around the Kaaba, because they would do that every day anyway. And in fact, they would probably, we don't know this for sure, but we can assume they would probably make sure they even went to the Haram after they went out of the house and then come back so that they actually were physically in the Haram as well for a while. And so no suspicions are raised, right? And there's no doubt as well, and this we can infer from the sources. We don't, again, we have to, when it comes to these seerah reports, you need to be a little bit more analytical and thinking. You cannot just read it at a superficial level. There must have been a very common sense reason, and that is his house must have been large as well, right? Because we had at least 40 people congregating in the house, and 40 is a large number for Mecca. Large number. So for 40 people to be in a room clearly means that the house of Al-Arqam was a relatively larger house as well. Okay, and of course the house of Al-Arqam, this is where Ammar ibn Yasir accepted Islam. This is where Suhaib al-Rumi accepted Islam. This is where Umar ibn al-Khattab accepted Islam. Remember the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab. We're going to come to that next Wednesday. When Khabbab brought him, when he was going to kill his sister Fatima, right? And then he repented, he changed his mind. And so when he made sure that he's sincere, Khabbab brought him to Al-Arqam's house. And he gave the code word, because you needed a code word to get in. And he gave the code word. And Al-Arqam stared at him. Who have you brought here? How could you bring Umar ibn al-Khattab? I mean, have you lost your mind? Right? So he's bringing Umar to the house of Al-Arqam. Right? And he explains to him, no, there's a reason. Let me speak to the Prophet ﷺ. And they bring Umar in and he accepts Islam. Right? So all of this is happening in the house of Al-Arqam. This is basically the central station of where the Prophet ﷺ was. And when you look at the reasons why this house was chosen, once again you find a lot of wisdoms. And you find clearly the Prophet ﷺ, obviously, he was the most intelligent human being ever. He's not just choosing any random house. There's reasons why even this house is being chosen.